We'll get started in 1 minute. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Masonic Seminar Series. My name is Brother Katie Kunsier, and I am your presenter and moderator of this particular group from Universal Co-Masonry. I have here in the office with me Brother Benjamin Hartle and Brother Penny platforms that we are streaming on, including Facebook, Twitter /X, and what's the other one we're on? YouTube. There we go, YouTube. And we're also working with our Zoom. Was created back in 2018 as a way to provide information that would help individuals who were maybe curious or they had a strong desire to join Masonry, but they just weren't certain what it was that they felt so called to join. And instead of being proselytizing or very gimmicky and trying to get people to join, we thought the best way to help our communities was to provide information. So every month we present a different topic. It's anthological, so the topics stand by themselves. They're not predicated on a month before, although if you do come every month, it does help with that consistency of understanding. And from month to month, we talk about Freemasonry in a specific aspect. And as I said today, the language of Freemasonry is the one that we'll be focusing on. And I'd like to say that all of the topics are really important. And I think I say every month that this one's the most important. So you'll have to forgive me if I do that again and say the language of Masonry is extremely, extremely important. It is the way that Freemasonry communicates with us. So that is why the Masonic Seminar Series was created. Universal Co-Masonry also created the Masonic Philosophical Society, which is a different organization, also free and open to the public, that is more of a discussion group and focuses on Freemasonry, but from an abstract perspective, many different ideas like economy and Freemasonry, art and Freemasonry. You can do literature and Freemasonry, politics and Freemasonry, all those different things. So if you're interested in discussion and you're not sure what I'm talking about, feel free to send me an email and I can get you connected with our sister group, the Masonic Philosophical Society. One last disclaimer, I do want to mention that every presentation that is given here is solely the presenter's opinion and studies. So everything that you see tonight and in the months past and in the months to come is things that I have found over my 20 years of being a Freemason. And we do have different Masons on our platform that are coming from different obediences. And some accuse me of being not a Freemason, maybe an Eastern Star or something else. But alas, I am a Freemason. I was initiated, passed, and raised as regular as anyone else. So what you will see are my interpretations and my understanding of what Freemasonry is at its heart and core. And what that means is each year when I present maybe the same topic, like this month, we're presenting the language of Masonry, I presented it last year, but I have changed my thoughts and updated my studies and looked into it more. So you might, hopefully, if you've seen it before, have come to some new understanding with me as I go through this process. So that's my disclaimer. We will go through the presentation. It's a lecture based, so I will talk a lot. And I'll stop every once in a while to open the floor for discussion and questions. I would ask that if you do have questions, please keep it on topic. Please don't be offended if I put your question off to the side if it's not something relevant, as some people, many of us join this group every month to talk specifically about what we're being presented today. And having experience as a teacher in the past, nothing is more frustrating than a teacher who goes on a tangent and we get off on some wonderful mystical thing and it has nothing to do with the topic. So please stay on topic if your questions and your comments. And if you get to be too long, please don't be upset if I cut you off, because we want to honor everyone else's opportunity to speak as well. We'll use the virtual hand option that you can raise your hand when it's time appropriate, and we will call on you one by one and we'll unmute you so that way we don't have any background noise that interrupts us. So I think that's all of the do's and the don'ts and what we're going to do here at the Masonic Seminar Series. So I would invite you to sit back with your cup of tea, have something to write on, whether it's your tablet or a notebook, and just write down your thoughts as we go through this. There is going to be many questions you have along the way, and I would beg you to ask them as we go. There's always that idea that someone else has the same question. Even if they don't, it's important that you ask the questions, as this is a discovery process. Just to give a little bit of history, which I normally don't do, but I feel inclined to do so this evening, a little bit of history about when I joined Freemasonry back in 2002. It was a very different landscape for Masonry back then, for Universal Co-Masonry. And I only joined because I knew people that I really wanted to exemplify, but I didn't know anyone else. And so I went in after, I went through the application process and I was accepted. I had done all the interviews. I went into my ceremony of initiation, which is the ceremony that makes you a member, knowing like 3 people, 4 people at the most. And it was very nerve-wracking because I didn't really know what I was getting into. I was like many of you. I felt this is what I wanted to do, but I didn't know anything about it. And so when we look at discovering whether or not Masonry is the path for you, even if you're certain, you need to ask questions, because even if you are accepted and you do become a Freemason, the questions never stop. The number one thing that we do in Masonry is we always ask questions, and not the easy ones, the hard ones, and the ones that make us feel silly or like maybe we should know that, or we're frustrated that we don't know the answer to it. We always ask questions, and that's important. So please, please, please don't be shy. Turn your camera on, get ready to ask questions, and really make this an interactive presentation so that you get the most out of this experience, that you can maximize our hour and a half together. At the end of our hour and a half, I will stay on with Brother Patrick and Brother Benjamin for about 10 minutes. If you have any questions, it can be specific to the lecture or about applications or any of that, you can stay on after, and we would be happy to assist you in whatever direction your questions are going. All right, so forgive me as you see me look off to the right here. I'm just looking at my screen. So my computer's a little off-centered here. Oh, there it is. I'm trying to leave the meeting. Let's not leave the meeting. That's a bad idea. All right, so this study center, we have 2 study centers, even though you'll see in the invite, it says 3. We share the North American Study Center with the Philippines because of the time zone. It makes it a little bit easier for our brothers and inquirers in the Southeast Asian area to come and be a part of North American Study Center. We do have another one, which is our International Study Center, and that's held on the 3rd Wednesday of each month. And Brother Patrick actually oversees that one, as it's done during the middle of the day to accommodate our international inquirers that are in Europe and Africa, which run on a different time zone than our Southeast Asian inquirers. So just keep in mind, if you want to see this again from a different perspective, you can always ask to see Brother Patrick's and go to that one as well. All right, so where are we going to go for the next hour and a half? The number one thing that we often hear about in Freemasonry is transformation. And so we're going to talk about why Freemasonry is effective in transformation. We'll define transformation, we'll look at the relationship of Freemasonry and why it is effective in that cause, and then how. So it's very interesting because in science, we're very good at answering processes. Like we can say how something is effective, but whys were really tricky. So, why does the sun set and rise a certain way? Why does the earth rotate a certain way? We can talk about how, but like really, why does it do that? I mean, it's up to speculation. But in this, we're going to look at the why and the how Freemasonry is effective. And then the modality. How does it use? What does it use to be effective? And that's going to be the language. What is the language of Freemasonry? Which I don't think is a big secret to most people, but I think the heart and roots of the language, I think, needs some brushing off, maybe some trimming and pruning to better understand that language, as many people have glossed on their opinions and beliefs of what that is, and it tends to not necessarily be very accurate. So when we look at transformation is a very heavy word, metaphysically speaking. It's very, very heavy because it has a lot of impact on an individual. Transformation is going to be a change and a permanent change in consciousness. And you can define consciousness by spiritual consciousness, you can do mental. It really just depends on how you look at that from your perspective. But it is a fundamental divine consciousness that is changed permanently. It's like once you see something, you can't unsee it. That's going to be that permanent change we're looking at. And transformation is extremely important. Transformation is not the same as transmutation. Transmutation is when you take something from one form to another. Transformation is much bigger. It includes transmutation, but transmutation doesn't necessarily mean transformation. It's directional, if that makes sense. So when we look at Freemasonry is working on a very deep level, multiple levels, I would argue, not just one, to create and sustain permanent change. Now, it's true, you can learn something and choose to live a different way, but you can't unlearn what you know. So why is Freemasonry effective in such transformation? If you look at the image at the right of your screen, you see what a stone, and it's covered, looks like it's not crustaceans, but it looks kind of that texture. It's very knobs and excrescences, and it's very unrefined. And on the outside corner there, it starts to be refined. That's the transformation that Freemasonry is trying to do. One of the tenets of Universal Co-Masonry, one of the landmarks, is the belief in the permanence of the soul. And again, the details are going to be up for you to decide what that looks like, whether it's, a religious perspective, such as a Judeo-Christian, Abrahamic perspective that your soul will go to a better place in the afterlife and be with the divine, or if it's more of reincarnation. It really doesn't, in the sakes of Freemasonry, it doesn't matter the details, although obviously it matters in practice, like how you live your life, obviously it matters. But when we look at the permanence of the soul, this is extremely important because Freemasonry is trying to work at every level, every time, to try to get that transformation to happen. And not very often, I would argue, does change in consciousness happen with the spiritual, physical, and mental at the exact same time. So it's kind of an interesting way to think of that divergence of that your consciousness may be in one area for your spiritual awareness versus your physical and your mental. They're not necessarily equal. So when we look at the permanence of the soul, and we look at Freemasonry, and we look at consciousness, we're looking at a way to continually, spiritually, mentally, and physically evolve. How do we keep doing that? How do we create that permanent and sustainable change in those levels of consciousness? So what does transformation require? Because it sounds very beautiful, like just the idea of transformation, going from one state to the next and becoming a new form, much like a chrysalis and the caterpillar into a butterfly. But there's a lot of work involved with it, as many, if not all of us know here on this conversation. There's a lot of work, and it's not easy work. The first thing you need is agency. You need the freedom to choose for yourself, sovereignty of your own opinion. This doesn't mean that you're not going to be influenced by great writers and thinkers and religious leaders. That doesn't mean that you can't listen to them, but you have the right and the ability, more so than the right, the ability to make choices for yourself. One of the requirements to become a Mason in Universal Co-Masonry is that you are of free and of good report. And that freedom isn't talking about a physical sovereignty, although that is implied, we're talking about a spiritual mental sovereignty. That if I present you an idea, and maybe it's some outlandish idea that you're like, that's crazy, that you have the ability to process it and come up with your own understanding of whether or not you agree with that. Oftentimes, I wouldn't say oftentimes, actually, I would say very rarely, but we do see some inquiries over the years where someone has to consult a religious leader or a guru or a spouse or a sibling on whether or not they can join. That's not agency. I'm not throwing stones. I'm just saying that's not agency. So when we look at transformation, you have to choose at the most deepest level to want to transform from one space to another. Exclusivity. Transformation is not for everyone. Transformation, it's not that I choose who transforms or someone chooses for me. It's that some people aren't ready to make that transformation, not ready to go into that next step of consciousness. And so you'll find that Freemasonry is exclusive. It is an application process because it's not meant for everybody. It is a universal philosophy. It is beautiful and can be applied to almost anything, but it is not for everyone. And so there's some people kind of get a rub against Masonry for having that application process, that exclusivity. But it's important because if I just walked up to you, a complete stranger, and was like, tell me your social security number and your bank account and your blood type, I don't think you'd give me that information. I would have to go through some type of interrogation process over many years for you to trust me with that information. When we look at transformation, it's not as mundane as those things, but it is important that you surround yourself by people who are ready to do this process with you. And so the application process is defined and outlined to help make sure that those who go through it and are accepted are ready for that process. We're not therapists, we're not psychologists, we're people trying to spiritually advance and to get in touch with that transformative cell, that well that's deep within us. And if we can't do that within the safety of our brotherhood, then we can't do that at all, because it's hard to be in a space where you do not feel comfortable opening up your insights and looking at them and saying, well, what do you think? What do you think of my shadow? I can't see it. What are your thoughts? So that exclusivity is a part of transformation. Another example, more historical, and there are many different examples out there, but the one I can think of at the top of my head is alchemy. Alchemy, back in the Western esoteric tradition, back in the turn of the millennia, 2 millennia ago, you'll see that alchemy was budding, and it started to bud for 2,000 years into what it is today. And it was at the height of its glory, at least Eastern alchemy, Western alchemy, during the Renaissance, the High Renaissance period, and into the Age of Enlightenment. I want to say it would pass through the Age of Enlightenment, because it definitely didn't do that. It started to transform into something else. But the alchemists barely ever took an apprentice, because it was completely for oneself. Now, Freemasonry is not like that. It's not so exclusive that it's for one person only, and there's no sharing. That's not the truth. That's an extreme example, but there's an exclusivity about looking at one's deficiencies and weaknesses and strengths and trying to make it into something more than what they see at the moment. A dichotomous nature. This one's an interesting one, and there's a lot of different ways that I'll play this throughout our discussion tonight. But in this context, when we look at transformation, dichotomous nature, I'm talking about the body-soul duality, in that we're looking at the body, the material, is a lesser form than the spirit. Now, I know that flies in some of the postmodern philosophies where it's the other way around. But if you look at the deep philosophy of Freemasonry, if you look at its roots, it comes to the idea that the spirit must learn how to control the body. So transformation realizes that there is an inherent conflict between the dichotomous nature of the man-God, the human and the divine, and that there's always going to be this conflict, much like friction on a plant that's trying to grow, like a redwood tree, trying to grow against gravity hundreds and hundreds of feet in the air. It does require that conflict. There has never been growth in times of peace. Conflict is essential for growth, and transformation doesn't come without conflict. And so we'll see those punctuated moments of evolution where we'll have a great conflict in our life and we'll grow a lot out of it, and then it will calm down and there'll be moments of peace. But then the soul and the body will start fighting again, and we'll have that conflict of who's the master of this existence. Is it the body or is it the soul? And then again, you'll have that another aggressive moment in conflict, and that transformation in the moment feels very punctuated. But I think if you look at it, and I'm only guessing because I don't know if I remember all my any of my past lives, but I think if you look at it from a eternal view, it's a very gradual evolution to that final point, whatever that may be. So when we look at transformation, it requires that dichotomous nature of the body and the soul. Freedom ties in with agency. Now, I am distinguishing freedom from liberty. They mean two different things, and that's a different discussion on another day. But freedom is your personal freedom. Freedom from vices that would overtake your life, and vices of the body. And we can think of a million different vices of the body. Some of them are very tangible. It could be food, it can be drugs, it can be alcohol. It could be vices such as pride and vanity. It can be a myriad of different things. We'll never in this lifetime, I believe, be free of all of our vanities and our vices. But we can loosen the hold of them, so we have a level of freedom that allows us to try to conquer them, to make decisions, to move beyond their control. The freedom of the spirit, unless the freedom of the body. Freedom of the body brings us back into a very hedonistic philosophy, that of pleasure, and pleasure being good, pain being bad. Whereas if you do the freedom of the soul, that's a very disciplined physicality and a very free freedom, very free of the soul. In Universal Co-Masonry, there's a saying, I think it's on our website. I don't know if you guys if you remember or not. But the saying is that we're very disciplined. We're one of the more disciplined orders when it comes to the physicality of, how we walk, how we dress in lodge, how we sit in lodge, all within lodge. And we talk about maximum amount of discipline, physical discipline, with the greatest amount of freedom of mind. And there's that freedom that I'm talking about. So Masonry works a lot on trying to get your body disciplined, all those habits that you want to get rid of, trying to get those under control so that your spirit and your mind can have the freedom to explore what transformation could possibly be, and the freedom to actually partake in transformation. Because if the body's not in line, higher consciousness can't exist in a vessel that is unprepared for it. And so you have to have that freedom of the spirit over freedom of the body. And there's that discipline that couples with it, the discipline of the body. In Masonry, at least in Universal Co-Masonry, we don't tell you what you can't study. In fact, we tell you to study everything. Although we do say, if you're gonna join Masonry, don't read the degrees above you, for a very practical purpose, really. Because when you read it, first off, our rituals are copyrighted, so they're not put in the mainstream, can't access it. So you're going to read someone else's ritual, and you're going to get ideas about what that particular ritual is supposed to be, and then you get to it yourself. You have all these expectations, and our ritual may have it, may not have it, whatever it is that you're expecting. And that can lead to a lot of disappointment and a lot of just like deflation. And so we do say, it's best if you don't read the higher degrees. And we also say, once you become a member, you obligate yourself not to read the degrees that you don't have until you have them. Outside of that, you can read whatever you want. We have a very beautiful library here, which Brother Patrick is the Grand Archivist of, and he takes care of the books over there. And it's not a big library, but it's beautiful, has a lot of first editions and a lot of different sections that people, both public and Mason, can come in and sit down in our library and read. And we have a section on anti-Masonry. Go read what they're saying about us. Like, there's no secret that we have haters. Like, anyone who stands for anything good is going to have haters. And so go read that if that's what you want. There's nothing that's off limits. But you have to have the discipline of the body, that you don't start getting into things that you're not ready for. And only you know that. So there's that freedom and that discipline that's coupled together. All of this, agency, exclusivity, dichotomous nature, and the freedom and discipline, are essential for transformation. So this is work that we're doing beforehand. to help us get through the process of transformation. So that's the why, because Freemasonry provides, why is it effective in transformation? Because it provides all that. If you are someone who's like, I can't follow a hierarchy, I don't want anyone telling me how to sit and lodge, I can't do that, we're not the institution for you. I'll just flat out tell you that. If you are a person who's like, look, I'm ready for the challenges of physical discipline so that I can have maximum liberty and freedom of mind, then we're the organization for you. Because learning how to sit was one of the hardest things I ever had to do when I joined Masonry, because, I don't know, just sat whatever way I want, I suppose. And that was really hard for me. But once I was able to get that under control, I was able to think about more important things than my comfort, like, should I cross my legs or uncross my legs? Like, that was already decided. So that discipline is very important to the why. How is Freemasonry effective in transformation? We're going to go through this slide, and then we're going to stop, and we'll open the floor for questions and comments. So if you have one, get ready, because I'm about to open the floor. So this is going to be three-pronged. The first one is ritual. And a ritual is more than a habit and a routine. And in the past, I've presented rather on ritual, and it always digresses into the difference between ritual and habit. I am not going to go there, because there is an absolute different perspective. Now, some habits for me could be your ritual, and that's fine. You can argue that subjectivity. That's fine. But a ritual, I think a ritual is like ineffable. So hard to explain, because you can say, like, here, a sequence of prescribed movements that are done to evoke the divine. Even that sounds hollow. I don't know how the brothers in the room feel, but that sounds like a hollow definition. Like, it doesn't quite explain the depth and the scope of what a ritual does. The ritual is not just to invoke the divine as you define the divine. The ritual is to help put you in a space so that you can commune with the divine and experience transformation. And it does it because it's not of this time. The ritual, and I'm only speaking for Universal Co-Masonry, because there are many of the Masonic orders are updating their rituals to be more modern. We have come against some of criticism for not doing the same. We're actually doing the reverse, where we're trying to restore what was once the ritual. That was hard to get out. And bringing it back to Old English or Old Spanish or Old Portuguese, which are the three languages we operate in at the moment. So it has old language in it. And so it makes you have to listen, because you're like, I've never heard that word, or I've never heard that word used that way. That doesn't make sense to me. Or what is the context that word's being used in? And we're going to talk a lot about the ritual and the context here when we get to the language. So please realize that I present this definition of ritual, and I don't like it because I don't think it's adequate. I don't think it explains what ritual really is. Ritual is experiential. You have to experience. It just goes into the places where you didn't even know existed in your own being. The second part of this is allegory. So a lot of people conflate allegory with metaphor. Allegory is a story behind a story. So you can think of all of the great stories. I would cancel out Disney on this, because Disney has changed all the great fables to have happy endings. They don't all have happy endings. Most of them don't. When you look at the really old fairy tales and whatnot, they tell a story. But that story is trying to convey a greater story on the backside of it. And Freemasonry uses that, the power of myth, if you want to talk about the words of Joseph Campbell. The power of myth is extremely important, the power of story. What is the number one thing when we're little kids that we learn by? Stories. How the good people always win and the bad people always lose, and the story. I mean, I know that's very black and white, and a lot of people say, well, life isn't so black and white. Well, in a lot of ways it is, in a lot of ways it's not. But as a child, we learn the boundaries of good and evil, bad and good, positive, negative. We learn the boundaries through stories. So how Freemasonry is effective in transformation is it doesn't just say, brother so-and-so, you need to evolve. Well, if it was that easy, we would all be gone by this point. We'd go to the next level, wherever it is. What it does is it presents stories. And because in Universal Co-Masonry, we require that each person go through their own ceremony. So we don't do stadium seating where a lot of people will get in the stadium and watch other people, like the degree be performed down on the floor. And, it's by proxy, if you will. And at the end, everyone has that degree that's in the stadium. We don't do that. You have to do the ceremony yourself, every single one. So of all the degrees I've taken, I have been present at every single one. And that's important because you are living out the story, the drama, the myth that Masonry is putting you in. And then it's your job to figure out the story behind the story and the lesson behind the story. And sometimes it's really easy just to take the superficial because it's a story. You're like, oh, well, that happened and that's this and that, and there you go. You have to dig deep. So if you're not someone who really likes to dig and find and question, maybe Masonry is not for you. When you look at allegory sits beyond the mental plane. And it goes past the physical plane and it gets into that spiritual plane. It puts you in those places where you have to make moral decisions that maybe in the outside world you haven't gotten to yet. Those type of dilemmas. It's much like dreaming, if you will. I would compare, Masonic allegory, Masonic drama to dreaming, especially if you have those dreams where, you had that dream 1,500 times and you're like, why do I keep dreaming this? And it's because your body's trying to practice certain scenarios. So if you had a dream where you're being chased and you keep having this dream over and over, but the details change, it's because your body is dreaming different outcomes so that if it were to ever happen in real life, you would have a really quick response and you would know exactly what to do, even if the scenario is not exactly the same. I would say that the allegory hidden in the drama does the same thing. The drama makes you practice, okay, if I was in this situation, what would I do? How would I respond? And then you spend your subconscious and oftentimes your consciousness trying to take apart, what does that mean? And would I really have done that in real life? Those type of things. But instead of it being a physically harmed drama like I just gave, it's moral and spiritual dramas. They're dramas of virtue and vice in their various forms. So the allegory gives you an opportunity to work on multiple levels, to hit the different levels of transformation, different levels of consciousness, and to spike it into the next level if you can. And last, and this is where we're going to spend the rest of our time together, and I'll stop here in a second, is symbols. We'll define symbols. We'll get more into symbols because this is the language of the language of Freemasonry. A symbol is a thing that sets boundaries and specific meaning in a given context. That is probably, opposed to my definition of rituals, which I can't stand. This definition is really good for symbols. It's very, very clear and cut. And we'll see that oftentimes people think symbols are one thing and they really are another. So these are the three parts of how Freemasonry helps or is effective in making transformation happen in its initiates. I am going to stop here and I'm going to open the floor. So if you have any questions or comments, please take this opportunity to raise your hand. And Brother Patrick or Brother Benjamin, one of the brothers in here will unmute you. So Brother Benjamin will unmute you. So please take a moment, process, do you have any questions about the why, questions about the how, questions about transformation? Do you have any thoughts on any one of those? Anything that grates against your nerves that you're like, oh, I don't like that. I don't like discipline or whatever. Please take this moment and share your thoughts and your questions. And Jennifer, please make sure you raise your hand virtually because we're not all going to see that. I just happened to see you, but Brother Patrick and then Jennifer.
So from Facebook, someone asked more of a generic question about us. Doran says, honestly curious, when did they start accepting ladies in Freemasonry and not just Eastern Star? So I gave him a little bit of an explanation, but I'm not sure if you wanted to go more in depth on that.
We can talk about when they started accepting women in Masonry at the end. We'll leave the live stream on just for a little bit in case, since it's from YouTube or Facebook, or wherever. But that is an important question because oftentimes people don't know that when women were allowed in Freemasonry. So we will address that at the end. If you want to go ahead and unmute
Jennifer Snyder.
Jennifer Snyder, please.
Hi, thank you. So my question was on the sitting. I recently sat Shishim and I've been doing like a Zazen practice of meditation. So I was wondering if it was kind of similar where you're kind of focused in within a group and if it's for an extended period of time, or I don't know how much you can share about that.
You're talking just about masonry in general, like the meetings? Yeah, okay. So there's some, it's really interesting. It's a great question. I'm trying to simplify it. Because I probably could do a whole nother presentation on that. There are many different parts to be played in masonry. And when I say parts, like I was saying, it's like rituals, drama, and it's, when I say acting, not like on a theater, but not on the stage. Everyone in masonry is really, really important. And so there are moments where we have combined meditation. Some brothers choose to pray, some brothers tend to meditate, whatever their bend is, it really doesn't matter. We don't ever say, like, we're going to meditate on the health of this person here. We don't do that. Our meditation is more of a platonic, focus on the things that are good, the things that are beautiful, so that allows each one of us to go in the space where our mind and our meditation, our prayer wants to take us. And those are there's pointed moments where we have that. Now as a group, we have officers in the lodge that will do a lot of the active work. And then there are brothers who are not officers. And so they'll sit in the lodge and their job is to hold the meditation for the whole meeting, is to support the meeting. So if we're doing an initiation, which again is that first ceremony that you come in to be a member, if you're not in an active position, so if I wasn't an officer, my job is to help support the lodge and the candidate going through the experience. So I meditate on whatever I think. So if I see that maybe the initiate is struggling, they're nervous, maybe I send out thoughts of well-being, or maybe I generically just send out thoughts of, I meditate on making a space where they can do what they need to do, because what do I know that you need, specifically. So there's a different way to do that. So you will have the undertone of the whole meeting. There's always a group of people meditating. Their job is to support mentally what's going on. And then you have another layer where there's a group of people who are active. And so they're going to be more focused on what they're supposed to be doing in their part. So their meditation is not necessarily there. And then as a group, everyone, officer and non-officer, we have those moments where we're told, let's meditate. We're going to go to a moment of meditation before we go to the next thing, that type of stuff. So it's kind of multi-layered. So I don't know if that answers your question, Jennifer. Perfect. All right. Brother Christine, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Brother Katie. Initially, when you started talking about transformation, you said that it has a heavy impact and makes a permanent change. And one thing I know that's really difficult is like changing the way that you think. So I'm curious as to, maybe you can explain a little bit about that process, because I know some of us kind of hang on to things that it's so hard to like unlearn. Mm-hmm. And I guess it's kind of a process of learning new things and learning how to learn, or something like that. Like there's a lot in there, and I'm not sure if I'm being really clear, but I think about learning, changing what you think you know, and allowing things to come in that can really uplift you.
I will try to answer that the best way I understand it, and then you'll tell me, Brother Christina, if I hit the mark or not, okay? So the number one word that comes to mind when I think about transformation, and I think about elevating our consciousness to a higher level or learning new things, is the word surrender. We must surrender our pride. I've often quoted this over the years because I think it's very, at least to me, it's impacting, because it's always a nice little reminder. If you look at in Hermeticism, there's the idea that all truths are but half truths. And I often think back on that particular statement. So I'm like, okay, well, I assert something to be true. Do I know it to be true? Can I consider that maybe it's not? That's the one thing that's beautiful about science, is the fallibility principle, is that you try to find everything wrong with your premise, so you can poke holes in your own story. And I think that really flies in the way of society today, because our job now is to assert that we're always right and to find all the resources to prove that we're right, when we surrender to the idea that it's probably more than likely that we're not right in every aspect of what we're thinking on any given topic. That if I'm even lucky to have half the truth, then I'm golden, like that's impressive. I don't even know if I have the 16th of the truth, so having, and not false humility, because I think a lot of people, we have a very Christian perspective as a society of what humility means. And it's to deny what we are, even if we know that we're, awesome at something, we still deny it because that's a humble thing to do. True humility is owning what you are and what you're not. So if you have an assertion and you have surrendered to its fallibility and saying, okay, what are all the different ways that I can be wrong? And then you go out and you talk to those you trust, because not everyone has something great to tell you. And, they're not as far along on the truth pattern that you are. Go out and talk to people you trust and have them poke holes in it. Then you start to change the way you think. I was talking with the brother this morning about, there's a particular author, and I can't remember her, but she wrote this tome, and it's amazing. It's on sex and gender, and it's not for those who think it's DEI or woke. It's not that at all. It was, it's in art, actually. It was talking about art and culture. And the brother and I were starting to talk about Freemasonry. And what he did is he overlaid because we were reading it together, he overlaid that particular topic on the history of Freemasonry. And I'm not just talking about universal co-masonry. I'm talking about all of Freemasonry. We're talking Anglo-Saxon masonry versus French or Scottish Rite masonry. And I really revolutionized the way I saw how the different rituals were done in the respective jurisdictions. So like English masonry or Anglo-Saxon masonry is a lot of language, it's a lot of words. If you look at the French Rite or the Scottish Rite, it is a lot more about imagery and I would say pictorial, but it'd be more like acting things out. And if I hadn't been open to that idea, if I hadn't surrendered to the idea that I don't know everything about a given topic, that I would have missed that opportunity to change my perspective. That doesn't mean that I can't go back and change it because I found new information, but it allows me to incrementally climb up a ladder of understanding. So the best way that I would say transformation and changing the way we think is surrendering to the concept that we are not right all the time. There are moments where we definitely have a point stronger than the other side, and we shouldn't just give up because there's a chance they might be right. So surrender, true humility, being honest with what you know. If you know something stronger than anyone else in the room, then speak it. You owe them that because they're doing the same journey, hopefully, as you, as poking holes in their theory. And if you hold back, then you can't have that parlay between the two different sides. So surrender, humility, and acceptance. Sometimes you come into an understanding that you just don't like. What am I supposed to do with that? And you have to work through it. You have to reconcile it. And that process of reconciliation is transformation. So I would say those three things are going to make it a lot easier for you to go through the steps of transformation. Brother Christine, did I answer your question? Okay. Brother Christopher, and then do you have someone for online? Okay, let's do Brother Christopher, and then we'll go to Brother.
Thank you, Brother Katie. Although symbols have a specific meaning, is it not also true that they can evolve and grow over time the more our understanding becomes of them?
Yes and no. That's a cheap answer. Symbols have their birthplace. They have their heritage and they have their genealogy, and you can't change that. Now, they can be manipulated, bastardized, they can be taken out of context, and like words, their meaning can change in modern times. But I always go to the swastika because that one's the easiest for everyone here to relate to. Swastika, I remember the first time I saw it on something outside of Nazi propaganda, I was like horrified. I was like, oh my God, this religion believes in the extermination of Jews, and like it started going through this whole Nazi ideology, and there's actually another Mason kind of smacked me up the side of the head and said that is way more ancient than the Nazi platform, and thus opened my eyes to the idea that symbols, you can try to hijack them, but they really are intrinsically themselves. And no matter how hard you try to make them something they're not, they will always try to go back to what they are. It's very much like saying, Brother Newkirk, there's so much you can change, right? And there's so much that I can change, but we can't change our fundamental natures, our spiritual nature. We are who we are at some level. There's, whether you want to call it the ego, and I mean that word in a positive sense, not in a negative sense, whether, each of us are the divine spark that has an individuality to it. There's something that makes us unique from the person next to us. And we can't change that. So we can try to modify and manipulate, but ultimately a symbol is intrinsically what it is. I cannot make anyone here, no matter how much I disagree with their platform or whatever they're saying, I can't make them less divine. I can't make them, even if they believe in something I totally think is not divine, I can't make them less divine. They are who they are. So that's why I gave that very cheap answer of yes and no, because sure, in the short term, you can make the swastika believe, everyone thinks that's a Nazi propaganda. But a lot of us out there still know that it's not. It's a very old and ancient Eastern symbol that has a very, very deep history. So that's why it's a yes and no. Does that answer your question, Brother Newkirk? You can just shake your head because I'm looking at you. Okay, perfect. All right, Brother Patrick, and then we'll go to Brother Margaret, and then we'll move on.
So on YouTube, Derek Papas asks, how does your version differ from Le Droit Humain? I left it when the Bible was no longer used. It is far more esoteric than traditional male Freemasonry. I see the connections to theosophy.
I'm assuming the question is, how does Universal Co-Masonry differ from Le Droit Humain? Quite extensively now. I would say when I first joined in 2002, Universal Co-Masonry was just coming out of we left the Le Droit Humain in 1994, and then several federations after us did the same thing for their various reasons. But I would say the Le Droit Humain is more secularized than Universal Co-Masonry. The idea that we're talking about symbols and we're talking about divinity, and we do have set books that are a part of the sacred nature of Masonry. And it's not, I've been in a lodge in France where it was the Little Prince, Le Petit Prince. It's not a blank book, which some people put in their temples, that there's a blank book or nothing at all. We very much are steeped in the perennial faith. And when I say perennial faith, some people might have a kind of a knee-jerk reaction to the word faith. I would remind you that faith is a confidence in a thing. And what most people have a knee-jerk reaction to is blind faith, is where they just put absolute confidence without any investigation spiritually or mentally into it. I'm not talking about that. The perennial faith is something that unites all of humanity throughout every epoch, every era, and every time frame. And Masonry is steeped in that. So if you are anti-religious, don't be a Freemason, at least with Universal Co-Masonry, because it's about the divine, it's about the great architect, it's about, the spirit ascending out of matter and going back to the source, whatever the source may be. And, Platonic idealism, that's the monad, and Gnosticism, that's something else. So, but it's that return. And Le Droit Humain is much more secularized. They don't have those things that we do. I don't mean any disrespect to them. I think they have their place in the Masonic world as we do. But if you're looking for something that's less esoteric and less religious, I would put them, I would send them willingly to the Le Droit Humain. I think they would be excellent. Likewise, there's obediences that are atheistic. We would send people who want to be Masons to those. We're not trying to dissuade anyone, because everyone has a place in Masonry, whether it's all male, all female, the mixed, and everything in between. So we are very much theosophical in origin. And when I say theosophical, I'm not necessarily replying to the Theosophical Society, but those teachings of Helena P. Blavatsky and those that came afterwards. The society is an appendage to that ideology. And one of our most puissant Grand Commanders, which when we were members of Le Droit Humain back in the day, was Annie Brother Annie Besant, and she was a theosophist and a very big activist. And we share that history. In fact, at the library, we have some of her remains in an urn. So like we very much embody theosophy, very much embody esotericism, more so than I would say that our Ladra Humane brothers and sisters do. So I hope that answers the question. We'll go to Brother Margaret, and then I lied. I'm going to sneak Brother Cat in, and then we'll move forward. You got Brother Margaret unmuted?
Hi.
There you are. What up, Brother Margaret?
This is was related to Brother Christopher's question in that about the changing of symbols. Do you feel that perhaps one of the Masonic functions is to guard the changing of the symbols, to keep them from changing?
I love what you say, Brother Margaret. I couldn't add anything onto that because I think that's your question is the answer. If you look at symbols are not meant to reveal anything. They're actually meant to conceal. And Masons are guardians of those symbols. That's why, going back to the swastika example, when I used to teach and, kids would, there's that, what is it, Hitler ad nauseum? Is that the fallacy that everything reverts back to?
Reductum ad Hitlerum.
There we go. Reductum ad Hitlerum. Everything gets reduced into the Nazis because they're like the greatest enemy on the planet. Like they're the perfect, bad guy. And I remember, kids would bring it up in class and I'd be like, have you ever researched the swastika? Go back and look at where it really came from. I wouldn't tell them what it meant because that's not my job. My job is to point them in the direction. And then that agency, that freedom to go look was on their own. And some kids did and some kids didn't. And they were able to uncover that symbol themselves. And I think that's ultimately what Masons do. It isn't to say, well, you're wrong and this is what it means. It's like, hey, let's have a conversation. I don't think you're very right on the interpretation today. So it is to guard against the encroachment of the bastardization of meaning. We definitely, Brother Margaret, you said it best. I think that was a great way to answer your question. And Brother Cat, good morning. Sorry, I just dropped her hand and now I can't find. Okay, there you go.
Good morning, Brother Katie. I guess what kind of triggered my question was when you mentioned about when we know something and we're holding back that information. I guess my interpretation was if I know something and I'm not sharing it to either someone or a brother, then I'm holding that information, which could have expand either wisdom or knowledge. I guess my question would be in the discipline part, when the discipline mainly for me is like molding someone's, character, or when you want to mold them into a certain person or character, and then we want to achieve transformation. But with our practice, and we are practicing and following ancient order, so how do we flow in both, with what's happening in the modern society while also keeping and respecting the ancient practice of what we're doing?
I will try to answer that the best way I understand. And if I get off topic with my answer, Brother Cat, just put me back on topic. There's a couple different ways. So for those who may not know, Masonry has its own language. So if it was just me and Brother Cat talking, we're not going to go into completely incoherent language, but it's definitely very formal, very old English, and it's very different. And so there's a way that she and I can communicate that I wouldn't do in a professional or profane world, as we call it. And I think that's where it really relies, is the discipline on knowing when to address the modern versus when you're in the system of Masonry. So with like professionals, if you're in the workforce and there's something going on, I would always try this the way of logic. I'd always be like, well, hey, have you thought about this, and this, or what about that? And I would never come at it emotionally because that always turns everyone off. And so I would try to bring up questions that would guide them in the way that I thought would be the best direction. Now, you can accuse me of manipulation, but everyone manipulates. The words I speak right now are manipulation. The words that are spoken to me are manipulation. And so when we look at taking a situation, we're trying to, as Masons, manipulate it for the better. And yes, I do think in a lot of times having had the practice through ritual and having the steps of transformation. No, I'm not fully transformed. I'm not enlightened, but having taken the steps towards transformation, I do understand that some things are better than others. And where you have situations that are emotionally charged, that are just over the top and dramatic, there's a best way to get out of that. And I think there's one way to talk. And when you look at in Masonry, there's another way to talk. And I would say that in Masonry, it's much more direct than in the profane world or that which is in the non-Mason world. I remember that person would say I was arguing. I was not arguing. I was just merely presenting an alternative viewpoint aggressively on a topic. And the brother just looked at me and said, I'm asking you as the right worshipful master, which is the head of the lodge. I'm not asking you as a friend. And I was like, oh, my back got straight. I knew exactly what he meant. And I realized that I was coming from a different perspective, and him being very direct in that, I wouldn't say it's a reprimand, but he definitely made my spine go straight, that he was correct because I wasn't coming at it the right way. And that's why in Masonry, you'll find that a brother may look at you and say, I don't think you really thought that idea through. And it comes off jarring because in polite society, we'd never do that. But we have to in Masonry, because Masonry quickens the evolution of its initiates. And if we're all being super polite and very, proper about everything, we don't quite get where we need to go. That being said, we're never mean and we'll never say you're wrong. I won't look at Brother Benjamin and be like, well, you're just wrong. That opinion's completely disgusting. I would never say that. I would challenge him and I'd be direct in my challenge, but I would never be disrespectful. And Brother Kat, I don't feel like I've answered your questions, so please tell me if I did or did not. And Brother Ben, can you unmute her? She's not there. Brother Kat, did I answer your question?
Yes, you did, Brother Katie. And I like the example that you provided. Thank you.
Yeah, I was talking about sucking on your humility for a second there. I was like, oh, he was right. And I didn't want him to be right because I was arguing. But it was a call to task. And ever since then, I've always tried to look at, especially in Masonry, because a lot of my friends are Masons, I try to look at moments where are we talking about Masonic stuff that's in a Masonic capacity, or are we just being friends hanging out, watching a movie and having a good time? Because I am going to act a little bit different, not like morally or anything like that, but just like in the way I dress. Like I would tell Ben in real life, like I think his opinion's garbage just to be obnoxious, but I would never do that Masonically if he's like really in a debate. So there's that caveat. Edward, and then Patrick.
Thank you. I have just a quick question. If we consider the self like the essence of a person, which is what we are in our essence, and the ego as the experiential self or character built that we have through our everyday living or through our life, is it a self or ego or both transformation?
It's all of it. You can't have the transformation of one without the other. And the way that I put it is that by transforming the body, it makes it a better vessel for the higher consciousness of the spirit and of the mind. If you have, and I firmly believe this, and I'm sure someone's going to write me an email, which I hope they do, and try to poke holes in my idea, which I love, and tell me I'm wrong. But I firmly believe that you cannot have a consciousness in a vessel that is not going to support that. You have to have both. And that really makes you have to think about the discipline of the body. And again, I'm not necessarily talking about certain things of the discipline of the body. I'm talking about specific things like, the habits and the thoughts and the things you do with your body. Are you taking care of your body to the best of its ability, or are you abusing it in certain ways? That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the person who may walk with a cane or who is, visually impaired. I'm not talking about those ailments. I think they have a part to play in transformation. I'm talking about the vices that really take us down, and we all have them. As you can tell, I'm argumentative. I like to argue, and that's a vice sometimes. Sometimes I just need to shut up and listen. So, we all have vices, and that has to be taken care of first before the mental and the spiritual really get to have their chance of being transformed. And even though I said earlier that you can't have not that you can't, but it's very rare to have all three bodies, the physical, the mental, and the spiritual at the same consciousness. They have to be rarely, fairly close in frequency for them to resonate. They can't be, as what we would say in science, very destructive. You have to complement each other. Brother Patrick.
So, Kristen on the YouTube channel asks or says, my partner is part of the all-male craft. As someone who is female and wants to join a mixed lodge, I'm not sure how to start the conversation with him about joining my own lodge.
I don't know if I'm the one to ask because my husband's a Mason and we kind of came about it differently. But what I would tell you is I'm not sure which direction you go, but I would meditate or pray on it. I would really put yourself in communion with the highest and ask or meditate on a way to approach that conversation and see how it goes. And it may be painful at first. Maybe there's a rejection or maybe there's an acceptance, but if there's a rejection, then I think there's a conversation to be had over and over, not necessarily to beat the partner down. That's not it, but to come to an understanding of why and work from there. So I would say definitely meditate on it, really put some thought and effort into how to approach it and then go from there step by step. Even if it is not the best response, if that is the case, I would keep working at it because he may be very much worth it. You just need to have that difficult conversation. So, all right, we're going to move forward. Great questions from everyone. Thank you for those who shared those thoughts and ideas. Okay, so we're going to move forward. Let me move all this stuff off my screen. So we're going to get into the crux of the conversation a little bit over half of the way through, but that's okay. That means it's a good conversation to have. What is the language of Freemasonry? That is symbols. And I'm going to beg you to please suspend your idea of what symbols are just for the next 30 minutes. And then you can go back to believing whatever you'd like if you so choose. But I want you to hear what I have to say because I'm going to openly and shamelessly try to take symbolism back from modern day understanding. So that is my campaign. If you don't like it, then I'd go have dinner right now or breakfast or do whatever you want. But I am going to argue that I'm trying to take back symbolism from a very misconstrued and gross understanding of what it is. We're going to look at symbolic systems, which is comprised of symbolism, symbology, and symbols. And we're going to talk about what that is. And this is always in tandem with and connected to ritual. In fact, the image in my head, and I was just looking at the double-headed eagles here on my screen, is the goddess Janus or Gemini. And you could say that symbols is one face and ritual is the other face. If you're familiar with that depiction, or here, the double-headed eagles, one head of the eagle is going to be symbol and the other one is ritual. So it's hard to talk about the whole speciation of symbols without talking ritual. Excuse me. Okay, so the first thing, and I am not a plagiarizer, so I'm going to cite my source on where I got this. And Brother is actually here, Colin. Some of you may know her. I had a discussion with Brother Rosario many years ago, and I don't want to divulge too much about her, but she has a deep love of Jungian psychology. And we were talking about signs and symbols, and she really laid it forth for me. And this was probably like a decade ago. This was a while ago. The difference between what a symbol is and what a sign is. So a sign is very two-dimensional, right? It has width and it has length. It's very two-dimensional. It denotes a person, an action, or a pending event. All you people who are into Taylor Swift or whatever I don't know. I'm not hip, so don't ask me to ask who's popular. But there's a sign for that concert. It's going to be up. That's a sign. This coming event is, happening. It could be a stop sign. It's telling you an action. You need to stop. A symbol does nothing of the above. It's going to be based and steeped in objective reality, which Masonry asserts exists, and is bound by a context. And to Brother Newkirk's question, it is eternal. So no matter how much I try to manipulate it into something it's not, it is what it is. And so what Brother Rosario and I were talking about many years ago is the difference between a two-dimensional sign and a three-dimensional symbol. Now, the tricky thing with the three-dimensional is now you have volume. So they both share length and width. So it's easy to conflate the two, but the symbol has volume, but it's endless. You can't sit there and say, oh, it's at 3 feet or 2 meters. It's endless. It's just a well that you can't ever get to the bottom of. And that's the volume of it. That's what makes it, I would say infinite as well, but eternal. It's timeless because you can always keep going back. But as any well is, it is bound by a boundary. It has a context to it that is specific and intrinsic. So you have here on your computer, you see a pedestrian, don't walk here, or you can't walk yet, or whatever. That's a sign. It's telling you to do or to not do a certain action. And then underneath, you have sacred geometry. It has there's a lot of different symbols hanging out in this particular image. And you can sit there and spend the rest of your life on this, trying to understand all that's behind that picture that just goes into ad infinitum, just goes forever. And you can learn so much. And that's the beauty about transformation wells. Once you dive in, you never can find the end of it. It just keeps going. And then that's why symbols and transformation go hand in hand. So let's talk about the symbolist movement of the 1800s. This is my campaign to take back symbols. So back in the day, in the 1800s, there was a movement, the symbolist movement, that said symbols aren't intrinsically a thing. Like, their meaning is malleable. It changes with time. It is whatever you want it to be. That is a very dangerous space to be in, and because you quickly slide down the slope of inaccuracy. I can't make a triangle a circle. It is what it is. There's certain rules that govern, the 3 sides of a triangle, and there's no sides of a circle, and all of that goes with it. The symbolist is really what propelled us in modern society to be, well, your truth is your truth. And that's my assertion. So when we look at symbolists and that movement, we have to step back and say, no, symbols mean something, and they are inherently their own meaning. And we have to be spiritually unlazy and go look for it and try to understand it and really throw ourselves into it. There's a great little book by Alcyone. Some people say it was Krishnamurti. Very small book, but it really packs a punch for so few pages. And that's At the Feet of the Master. And I was reading it. I like to read it every once in a while, just as a reminder of some things I should be doing. And one of the things that it said was it gave me permission to not have to study everything. Is one of the things I feel like is you get in Masonry, there's just like this fire hose that just comes on you. And you feel like you have to just know everything about everything, which is ridiculous. There's no way you can do that. And that book gave me permission to really just pick something and study it. You don't have to go down every rabbit hole that you find. You can go down as many as you choose, but find something and really come to know it. And I would challenge you, if you want homework, I always like to give homework if you'd like it, accept the challenge. I would challenge you to find a symbol that really penetrates your inner being, that you really love for whatever reason, and go study it. And this isn't to mentalize the spiritual nature of a thing. Sometimes we can make things so overly cerebral, it's toxic. It takes out when I say magic, I don't mean that in the fake Houdini sense. I mean that in the actual, like, naturalistic, imaginative essence of a thing. It's more than just a gimmicky thing. But go study it and go know what it means. And then once you feel like you've really grokked what that means, then go on to the next symbol that speaks to you, or whatever next, and just take it piece by piece. I used to tell my students when we would be, God forbid, learning stoichiometry, which is working with mathematics and science, it's applied mathematics. And these kids were, looking at this long mathematical problem. They were just dying because most kids don't care for math. And I would tell them, it's like a hamburger. Take a Big Mac. I haven't had those in like 20 years, but it sounds good right now. Take a Big Mac. Do you eat the whole Big Mac in one bite? No, you take it bite by bite. And so when we're doing these stoichiometric problems, do one step at a time. you know, like just do this one step, go gram some moles and then moles to, you know, whatever particles, wherever you're going, just take it step by step. And eventually you'll get through the whole hamburger and you'll be at the end and you'll be satisfied because you did it step by step. And I would apply that to this. Take your steps, learn one thing at a time, and eventually you'll wake up and realize that you're surprised about how much, not that you like know of facts, like who cares what the gravity of the moon is unless you're working in physics for the moment, but like facts like I was talking about this morning with the art and culture and sex and gender and looking at masonry and the history, like those are very separate topics that this brother laid on top of each other. And it just blew my mind. And I was like, I understand what he's saying. And, you know, if I hadn't taken it step by step, I wouldn't have. So just remember, as big as the task is, just take it bite by bite. And eventually you'll be very surprised when you wake up and know a lot more than you ever thought you would know. And I'm talking true knowledge, not artificial, you know, look it up in a book or on Google knowledge. Symbols have, this is a part where the symbolist kind of took it and made it bigger than what it was. I told you I'd be talking about dichotomous natures throughout. In the beginning, we talked about the body and the soul. In this sense, we're talking about the dichotomous nature of symbols. Words mean something. There are symbols, and we agree with that. I think as a whole, it's a way of talking in our society. Symbols are the same way. You have their individual meaning, and then their higher meaning. That's the dichotomous nature of symbols. So it's not just going to be the swastika is this, okay? And I'd like to, you know, differentiate and said the Hitler swastika is this, the Nazi swastika is this. You know, it's not like that. There's a grammar. There's a grammar to symbolism. There's a grammar to understanding symbols. So when you go down and you figure out what symbol you want to study because you're diehard to take my homework as a challenge and go study a symbol, you're looking at its individual meaning. And eventually you'll start to understand its higher meaning. So it's going to have a two-pronged approach. Now, the symbolist of the 1800s just said it's whatever you want it to believe it to be. And that really smacks in the face of what a symbol is. It can't be. The tricky part is context. You have to establish context. If the only context I know is Nazi Germany, then that's the only way I'm going to understand that symbol. But if I can take it back into Eastern philosophy and Eastern religions like Jainism, like I can understand where it came from. And there's symbols that are so old that we don't even know how old they are. We have, you know, literature from way back when, but we know that that may not be the first of its kind. So you have to study context. And this is the thing about ritual. Remember I said it's that double-headed eagle. Ritual is the written symbol, right? It's done by words. It has context. And that's why in Universal Co-Masonry, we're not trying to modernize our ritual. We're trying to put it back in its context that it was written, because transformation, as you move back in time, becomes more and more pure when the context becomes more and more established and you're able to do it. That's why I forget the professor's name now. Just left my head, but he's a PhD in the philosophy of science and alchemical sciences. And I wish I could remember his name, but he has taken the liberty and the dedication and discipline to try to reenact all the alchemical experiments based on the way that the alchemists like Paracelsus or much later Robert Boyle, the way they wrote their method, if you were the scientific method, the way that their procedure is the word I'm looking for. And he tries to do exactly the way that they made their alchemical experiment. And one of the lovely ingredients in alchemy is always urine. So, you know, he has to go find certain pure urine. But that sounds disgusting, right? I know, because it's a bodily fluid. But when we think about it in terms of symbol, we have to go find what that is back in context. We can't just keep putting it in modernity. Modern times have many beautiful things in it, many beautiful things, but many misinterpreted things as well. On one hand, we think we're smarter than the ancients. And I think on the other hand, we don't realize that we're not. So going back, we have to put that symbol in context. That means we have to go study it. Does this sound like a colossal job? Yes, that's why Freemasonry is a lifestyle. and not a hobby. And for those who make it a hobby tend to be disappointed because it's very lackluster. Well, what you put into it is what you get. It's all experiential. So when you go back and you find how to make the urine a certain way, and in this context to make the menstruum of this particular metal, then you can actually do what they were doing and see what they were seeing and get an understanding of that process. Symbols are the same way. So this goes into that third part. We talked about symbols, we talked about allegory. We're staying with symbols. We're just going to take a little side tour here and talk about the allegory. I brought in allegory as one of the ways that how Freemasonry is transformative. Symbols they're being used for a greater purpose, and that is to understand the story behind the story. It is there to help us take apart the individual meaning of just the front story and get into the higher cognizance of that backstory. So the beauty of it, though, is there's really, when I say dogma, in this case, I'm kind of using it as a pejorative. I don't necessarily think dogma is a pejorative in general, but when someone gets really dogmatic about something, that's why in Masonry, you won't find people very dogmatic about interpretations of symbols. Because, again, there's that never-ending well of just context and purpose and meaning that, we're all in different stages of that well. And so there's a great discussion about how, especially if you're here at our headquarters and you're sitting at our guest house, which is kind of like a really nice old log cabin, and there's round tables that we sit at, and at any night on a workshop, we have workshops 3 times a year, you'll find brothers sitting there with their tea and coffee, just kicking around a particular ceremony that might have happened and trying to take it apart, the symbols, and get to the understanding of the full allegory. And this is where perception comes in, and people's worldviews and understandings come in. And it really makes for a really robust conversation because we're trying to understand what Masonry is trying to get us to understand in that allegory. Hence why Freemasonry is steeped in Judeo lore with this story of King Solomon's temple. If you don't like the Bible, and that includes the Torah or the Gospels, I would highly recommend not to do Masonry, because we are steeped in those histories and in that particular story. It's a basis of our allegory. It's the basis of our symbols. Now, it's not to say you have to be Jewish or Christian to become a Mason, at least with Universal Co-Masonry. It's true. We have people of all different belief systems, but it does mean that you have to accept them on some level as a beginning point for the allegory to tell the story. And a lot of people are like, well, I don't believe, in King Solomon's temple. Remember, it's the story behind the story. King Solomon's temple is the foundation to start the superficial narrative, but behind it, there's something more. And so that's just something I want to put out there. And right in this particular image, there's so many symbols going on. You have the brazen sea on the right with the 12 oxen, 3 oxen in each cardinal direction. Is that the 12 tribes of Judah? Is that the 12 zodiacal signs? Is it, there's a lot of discussion. And you have on the far left, you have the incense, the altar of incense. You have all these different things. And is the temple facing east or west? All of those have a great part of that discussion. And a Mason would sit down and letter or half it with another Mason on this particular story. So let's talk a little bit about symbology. It is not what you think it means. Most people think it's the study of their symbols and their meanings. That's pretty boring. Symbology is actually what's in between the spaces, or in between the words or the symbols. It's the spaces. It's the spaces that tell a story. So when you have, here is an image. It's one of my favorites. It's the Weeping Virgin. And if you look at this particular image, you have the broken column, and it looks like it is is it Corinthian? Is that a Corinthian capital? Yeah, I think it's Corinthian. So you have a Corinthian style pillar that's been broken in half, and you have Death grabbing the Virgin's hair and lifting up his scythe, and you have the acacia in her right hand with the book and the lantern. And then in the bottom on the steps, looks like there's 3 steps, at least in this image. There's an hourglass, and like each one of the things I just said, you have Death, you have the Virgin, and you have the column, the book, the steps, all of that. Those are each individual symbols. But symbology is the studying of the spaces between those symbols and trying to understand the grammar. What is this layout of symbols trying to get you to understand? Again, it's the allegory behind the story behind the story. It's the allegory of it. So it's all about a language. And that's why I use the word language with it. It has syntax, it has grammar, it has punctuation, it has all of that, but a very abstract role. So symbology is the roles that symbols have within the context of a ritual. And I use ritual a lot because, again, Masonry is ritual. So when we look at this, I'm thinking, I'll take the hourglass just because that's on the screen. Depending on what ritual I'm looking at, first off, it may not have an hourglass. So we'll just look at the rituals that do have hourglasses in it. And then, trying to say, the hourglass has a meaning to itself. Is it time? Is it the passing of time? What does the hourglass individually mean? Again, we have to put it back in context. And then the higher meaning is, well, in ritual, when it's with all the other symbols in the space, what is it trying to get me to see? And that's symbology. It's not just studying their meanings, like, oh, I'm a symbologist and I just study their meanings. No, it's understanding the spaces between, the abstractions that come out between the hourglass, the stairs, Father Death, and all that. That is symbology. I already said what symbolism is not. What it is a way of coming to know reality. When I say reality, I'm not talking about your truth is your truth and my truth is my truth. I'm talking about objective reality. What Plato would say is knowledge. He used those synonymously, but it's coming to know reality is demonstrated through a particular natural phenomenon, such as the understanding the reality of human nature by understanding the human itself. One thing that I love when we talk about symbols, everything in Masonry is a symbol, including the Mason. And that flies, to this particular statement, such as understanding the reality of human nature by understanding the human itself. So when we look at this, we're trying to understand a particular phenomenon, something that has to do with our transformation. We're trying to get there, and it is mind-bending, and it is spiritually taxing and mentally exhausting. And we're trying to get to what is it that these symbols are trying to get me to understand. And that's why even 20 years later, I can be sitting in a ceremony I've seen 100 times and be like, oh, that's, oh. I'm a slow learner. But that's what that means. Or I'll see something for the first time, I'm like, how did I not see that? And that's because we're getting to that consciousness where we can keep elevating it so we can pick up new parts of the story. That's symbolism. The term symbolism only applies to the interrelated set of symbols of any single phenomenon. So in the case of phenomenon, you can say ritual. So it has to have a context. So in this case, it's the ritual or a phenomenon. And then it's a whole set of symbols coming together. That's symbolism. Symbology is the abstraction of spaces. Symbolism is taking in the whole set of symbols in the context of this case, the ritual. And what I mean by that is, so from, the first degree, once you show your proficiency and all that, you can go to the second degree. Well, the second degree has a completely different ceremony than the first degree. And the third degree is likewise. They all have different ceremonies. So when we talk about single natural phenomena, we're talking about each individual ritual. So I, again, may see an hourglass in different rituals, but it's in the context of that ritual, of that natural phenomenon, that the symbolism will come out. Images, myths, and symbols are sets of symbolism that come together to create a transcendent idea. So what does this mean? In Universal Co-Masonry, this is different, not for every order, but we're pretty unique in this way. Traditionally, what you'll see in other obediences is that you apply to Masonry, you go into the first degree, everyone's a first degree, excuse me, and then you go to the second degree and then the third degree. And then if you want to do anything else, you have to go join a different, Masonic obedience. You can join the Scottish Rite, you can do the York Rite, you can do a bunch of other epistolary degrees, a bunch of other stuff. But at Universal Co-Masonry, we have one single advancement. So no matter where you come in. So if you come in as a first degree, which everyone does, you go to the second degree and then the third degree, and then you go to the Mark degree and then the Royal Ark Mariner and so forth and so on until, eventually, hopefully someday you get to be a 33rd. And when we look at this last part, images, myths, and symbols are sets of symbolism. Each degree is a symbolism, is a set of symbols, myths, and images. But when you stack them all up together from the first to the 33rd, that's the transcendent idea that we create. That is something we are creating. And that's what Masonry is trying to do. It is a grand narrative. Each degree has its own narrative, but it builds into a total story. And that's the transcendent idea that we're trying to get you, not we, but Masonry is trying to get you to go through. You want to just look at my time here. I am actually out of time, but symbolic systems, there's not much more I could add to it. This is a little bit more nuanced and detailed, but I'll just leave it up here if you ever just want to stare at it and read it. But Masonry is a symbolic system, and it's the intentional usage of symbols in order to provide an associative meaning. Masonry is trying to help you transform. It's trying to help you release the divine out of the man. And all of us come at it at a different point in our evolution. And so it has to be universal. Because if we would all have to come in at the same point, and I don't think we do. When I joined Masonry, I was pretty ignorant on a lot of stuff that I wish I wasn't. And there are many brothers who were coming in at the same time that just knew a lot more spiritually, emotionally, mentally than I did. And I'm grateful that transformation, that well, is a place where we can jump in wherever we're ready, and we can go through that process. Because the symbolism that is found in Masonry, that symbolic system that it is that it's trying to get you to really be your best self. And not like just in the sense of like making good men better, but making your spiritual aspect the true ownership of this existence, and that your physical aspect is a steward of that spirit. And so I'm going to just leave it off of this. That particular comment. I want to thank everyone for coming out. I am going to stay on before we stop the streaming to answer the question about women in Masonry. But I want to thank everyone for coming. Next month, we'll be doing a different topic. I haven't picked it yet because, as I often say, I like to intuit what's the best one to do. So I like to wait till the last minute to decide that. So please check your invites to see what we're going to do next month. And it will be a standalone topic on Masonry. I want to thank Brother Benjamin and Brother Patrick for their assistance with helping us on our various platforms. And I want to thank you guys for coming, because it would be really boring if, well, not too boring because we're pretty fun over here, but pretty boring if it was just the three of us every month. So thank you for coming and spending time with us. If you have any questions that you maybe are a little too shy to ask, you can email me at any time. And I hope to see you at the next seminar. Feel free to invite any friends that are interested. If this is being recorded, you can find it on our YouTube channel, on all sorts of fun stuff. So we're here as a resource to help you on your journey of transformation, wherever it may take you. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll give a couple of minutes so people can sign off if they would like, and then I'll answer the question about women in Freemasonry. All right, so the question was, when did women become Masons? Right? That's
Yeah, when did Freemasons start accepting ladies and not just accepting them into Eastern Star?
Thank you. First off, Eastern Star, for those who are not familiar, is very, very different than Masonry in that an Eastern Star is not a Masonic organization. It is for people who have Masonic heritage, meaning like my husband, since he's a Mason, I could be an Eastern Star. My daughter could be an Eastern Star if she wanted, if someone's granddad was, a Mason, they could be Eastern Star, and it's just for women only. But just being an Eastern Star doesn't make you a Mason. So it's an ancillary organization for women in the families of, Masonic families that want to be a part, but are not fully a part of Masonry. So the tricky question, or the tricky answer to the question about when women joined Masonry, is that there's multiple answers, because it depends on where you start in history. In modern times, Marie Durham joined in the, what did we say, mid 1800s?
1881, 1882.
So late 1800s. I'm terrible with dates. Late 1800s. And she was initiated into a lodge in France, the Free Thinking Lodge, which ultimately would be the birth of the Le Droit Humain. She was in late 1800s. That's the modern answer. One of the things that we hear about, especially in Universal Co-Masonry, when people like to tell me that I'm not a Mason, it's always my favorite, is that they're like, well, women have never been Masons. Yes, they have. There's a couple manuscripts. The Holywell manuscript, I think is that, correct me if I'm wrong, is that 700s, the Holywell? I don't know. I'm being honest, I'm the worst with dates. I don't even remember when I was married. So don't look at me for dates, but it was fairly late in past history where women were on the registers of operative guilds. So women were operative Masons. And Holywell manuscript, and there was one other, the Regis manuscript. No, it wasn't the Regis manuscript that had women in it. No, it wasn't Regis. There was another one. I have to think about it. That also talked about women. The problem is that male craft Masons, as we call them here at Universal Co-Masonry, which is all male Masons, they, not all of them, but quite a large group of them conflate the idea that, because some organizations require their members to take an obligation saying that they will not be present at the making of a female Mason, so they can't be an initiation of a woman. Well, that doesn't say that women can't be Masons. It just says they can't be present at an initiation ceremony of a woman. And there's a conflation between that people think, well, because I can't be there, women can't be one. And that's not true. We have, like I said, a couple manuscripts from the last 1,000 years that have women on the registers. And so, if you go back to the line of thought that some people believe in, that Masonry is from the operative guilds, well, women were in the operative guilds, so why wouldn't they be in modern Freemasonry? Now, the argument with that is that women, well, let me back up. I had said that women or Masons have to be free. Well, women were property until women's suffrage, right after the Victorian era. So we weren't free. You can't be a Mason, in which one other thing is transformation is you have to be able to do this on your own cognition. And if I was the property of my husband, that's really hard to do. It's not impossible. But if he doesn't want me at a meeting, I can't go, if I was property. And so that was one of the excuses. Maybe it was a good excuse, maybe it was a bad excuse. I think that's up to each person to decide, that women were precluded, that women were less than, they weren't a full person. So, but times have changed, and that's no longer the case. And so I would argue that's no longer a reason to exclude women. That being said, I do think there's a place for all male Masons. I don't think that they need to be, kicked out of the Masonic world. I don't agree with them, but I don't think they, should be removed. They have their place and they have their purpose. And so I hope that answers the question clearly enough. Okay. We're gonna stop the stream and we're gonna go to the floor and see if there's anyone who has questions. Again, if you want an application, or if you're looking about the application process or about your application specifically, or you have a question about the presentation, any of that would be a good time to ask at this point.